When I swore I'd never believe in God again, He showed me something I couldn't deny. As I sat there on the floor, still shaking from what had just happened, my own words came back to haunt me. That phrase I had thrown at heaven for years: "If God is real, let Him prove it." I had shouted it in anger. I had mocked people with it. I had worn it like a badge of pride. And now here I was, realizing that He had just answered me in a way I could never deny. For so long, I expected some grand event, something undeniable to the outside world. A flash of lightning, an earthquake, some scientific impossibility that would leave no room for doubt. But instead, the proof had come quietly, in a whisper inside my heart. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was exactly what I needed. And deep down, I knew it was more real than any physical sign could ever be. It hit me then that I had been setting the terms of the challenge all along. I was demanding God prove Himself my way, on my conditions. But the God I just encountered wasn't small enough to fit into my arrogant rules. He had chosen His way, gentle, personal, undeniable to me, even if invisible to others. And that made it even more powerful, because I couldn't fake or explain it away. I thought back on all those moments when I told believers they were delusional, when I rolled my eyes at prayers and mocked testimonies. And here I was, with my own testimony unfolding right inside me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become the very thing I swore I would never be, a man who had experienced God for himself. The memory of all my challenges made me feel a strange mix of shame and gratitude. Shame because of how arrogant I had been, how blind and stubborn. Gratitude because, despite my pride, God still chose to answer me. He didn't owe me anything. He could have ignored me, left me to my pain and anger. But He didn't. He proved Himself in mercy, not in wrath. I realized then that this was no coincidence. The timing, the sequence of events, the brokenness that led me to this exact night, it was all part of the answer. Every loss, every wound, every lonely hour had pushed me to the place where I could finally hear Him. The proof I had demanded didn't come in the way I expected, but it had been building all along, piece by piece. I sat there whispering the words to myself: "If God is real, let Him prove it." And then, quietly, I whispered back my own answer: "You did." For the first time, I admitted it, not with sarcasm, not with defiance, but with a broken kind of humility. The challenge I had thrown at Him had become the doorway through which He walked into my life. The strangest thing was how certain I felt. All my life I had prided myself on logic and evidence, and here I was, more sure of this invisible presence than anything I could touch with my hands. It wasn't blind faith. It was an encounter, something undeniable, something no argument could ever erase. This was the proof I had asked for, even if it didn't fit my definition, and as I thought about it, I realized maybe that was the point. If the proof had come my way, it would have fed my pride, given me another excuse to argue and twist things. But because it came His way, I couldn't control it. I couldn't explain it away. I could only receive it. The proof wasn't just for my mind, it was for my heart, and my heart finally believed. That night, I knew something had shifted forever. The words I had once used as a weapon against believers had now become the words that marked the beginning of my own faith. I had asked God to prove Himself, and He had, not with thunder, not with lightning, but with a whisper that broke through the hardest walls of my soul. When I stepped into my teenage years, the small indifference of my childhood turned into open rebellion. I didn't just ignore God anymore. I made it my mission to ridicule the very idea of Him. Whenever someone in class mentioned church or religion, I felt an immediate urge to roll my eyes or make a sarcastic remark. It made me feel smart, superior, as if I had figured out life while they were stuck in ancient myths. My pride grew stronger every time I mocked someone. It became part of my identity. I was the realist, the one who saw through the lies, and people laughed along with me, which only fueled the fire. I especially remember targeting my Christian classmates. They carried their Bibles, wore cross necklaces, and talked about youth group activities. To me, they were easy prey. I called them naive, brainwashed, and weak. "You really believe in some invisible man in the sky?" I would sneer. Every time I said things like that, I felt powerful. I thought I was exposing them, showing the world how foolish they were. What I didn't realize then was that my cruelty was not wisdom. It was insecurity. But at the time, mocking them gave me a strange satisfaction, like winning a game. There were moments when those classmates would invite me to church or a Bible study. Instead of politely declining, I made a show of it. I laughed in their faces, asking, "Do you really think your God cares if I show up?" I wanted them to feel embarrassed, because deep down, I wanted to justify my own emptiness. If I could tear down their faith, I wouldn't have to face my own lack of answers. So I mocked louder. The more they smiled with patience, the more it irritated me. Their calmness felt like an insult. Why weren't they fighting back? Why didn't they snap at me? It made me despise them even more. Looking back, I realized that my mockery wasn't only about them, it was about me. I was trying to silence the questions I didn't want to ask. Every time I insulted someone's faith, I was really trying to convince myself that I was right. But as a teenager, I didn't have the maturity to admit that. Instead, I doubled down on my arrogance. I made jokes during lunch, whispered sarcastic comments in class, and rolled my eyes at any prayer I overheard. I was becoming hardened, calloused against anything that even hinted at God, and I wore that hardness like armor. One particular memory still haunts me. A girl in my class once said she prayed for me. She said it kindly, without judgment. I laughed in her face and told her to save her prayers for people dumb enough to believe in fairy tales. I remember the look in her eyes, not anger, not shame, but sadness. That expression stuck with me for a while, though I buried it under more sarcasm. At night, when I thought about it, a small whisper inside me asked, "What if she's right?" But I never allowed myself to dwell on it. I laughed louder the next day to drown out that whisper. My rebellion wasn't just against God, it was against authority in general. If a teacher mentioned religion, I argued. If a peer showed faith, I mocked. If anyone talked about morality tied to the Bible, I challenged them with harsh questions. I prided myself on being the skeptic, the tough one who couldn't be fooled. The more I rebelled, the more I felt in control. But the truth is, I wasn't in control at all. I was a teenager hiding behind arrogance because the alternative, admitting I might be wrong, terrified me. Pride was easier, mockery was safer. At parties, I played the role of the bold atheist. Surrounded by friends, I would rant about how religion was nothing but a scam. People laughed, some agreed, others stayed silent, but I loved the attention. It gave me an identity. I thought I was different, smarter, more enlightened. In reality, I was just echoing cliches I had picked up from books and TV shows. I wasn't deep, I wasn't wise, I was just loud. But the louder I got, the more I believed my own words. And slowly, I turned into the very caricature of arrogance I thought was strength. The irony is that the Christians I mocked never seemed to break. They didn't fight back with insults, though they could have. They didn't return my mockery with anger. They kept living their faith quietly, even when I ridiculed them. And that frustrated me. It felt like I was losing, even when I thought I was winning. How could they still smile, still forgive, still stand firm when I tried so hard to shake them? I couldn't understand it then, but their peace was the very thing that exposed the cracks in my rebellion. Still, I wouldn't admit defeat. I convinced myself that they were simply too blind to see the truth. I told myself I was helping them by showing how ridiculous their faith was. It was self-deception, but I believed it. In my teenage pride, I thought I was on a mission to liberate people from lies. In reality, I was just pushing them away and hardening my own heart. Every cruel word I spoke, every mocking laugh, was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and God. And I was proud of that wall. I thought it made me strong. By the end of my teenage years, I had built a reputation, the one who mocked, the one who questioned, the one who laughed at faith. I wore it like a badge of honor. I didn't realize that behind the jokes and arrogance was a soul starving for meaning. The very people I insulted had something I didn't, a quiet strength, a peace I couldn't explain. But I was too blind, too stubborn to admit it. My rebellion wasn't just against them, it was against the God I swore didn't exist, and that defiance became the defining mark of my adolescence. In my late teens and early 20s, I fully embraced the idea that science was the only truth worth believing in. I wore this belief like a badge of honor, convinced that I was standing on the unshakable ground of reason. To me, science explained everything: life, the universe, morality, even human emotions. If something couldn't be measured, tested, or explained by logic, then it was irrelevant. That mindset gave me a sense of superiority. I looked at religious people as outdated relics of a primitive past. I believed I had risen above such ignorance, armed with the sharp sword of rational thought. Whenever conversations about faith came up, I quickly cut them down with scientific terminology. I would mention evolution, the Big Bang, or neuroscience, as if quoting these theories gave me ultimate authority. The truth is, I didn't fully understand half of what I was saying. I just repeated what I had read or heard, confident it made me sound intelligent. My pride wasn't in knowledge, but in the appearance of knowledge. And the more I spoke, the more I believed my own facade. Science had become my god, and I was its devoted disciple. What I didn't realize was that I was misusing science. Real science seeks truth humbly, testing and questioning, but I twisted it into an ideology, a weapon against belief in God. Instead of curiosity, I clung to arrogance. Instead of wonder, I chose mockery. I wasn't exploring the mysteries of the universe. I was using them as walls to keep God out. I called it enlightenment, but it was really just another form of blindness. I told myself science had all the answers, but deep down, I knew there were questions it couldn't touch. Questions about meaning, purpose, and why I even longed for truth in the first place. Still, I hid those doubts behind confidence. I surrounded myself with books by famous atheists, quoting them like scripture. I watched debates online, cheering every time a believer was ridiculed. My heart swelled with pride when I saw faith being dismissed as superstition. It made me feel validated, as if my rejection of God was not only justified, but celebrated by the intellectual elite. In reality, I was just echoing the voices of others, mistaking borrowed arguments for personal conviction. I thought I was free, but I was only chained to a new kind of dogma. There were moments of wonder that almost betrayed me. Standing under the stars at night, I would feel a strange sense of awe, as if the universe itself was whispering something greater. But instead of listening, I quickly covered that whisper with scientific jargon. It's just physics, I told myself. It's just the laws of nature. I reduced beauty to mechanics, wonder to equations, and awe to random chance. Yet the feeling always lingered. No matter how many times I silenced it, the vastness of existence seemed to hint at something more, something my science-only worldview couldn't quite capture. In debates with believers, I prided myself on winning. I didn't care about listening or understanding. I only wanted to prove superiority. I quoted scientific studies I barely grasped, throwing around terms to make others feel small. And when they couldn't answer, I smirked, believing I had crushed their worldview. But what I failed to see was that science never disproved God. I had built a false dichotomy in my mind. Either science is true or God is. In reality, science explains the how, but it can never fully answer the why. Yet I refused to admit that. Pride wouldn't let me. The deeper I sank into this worldview, the more I began to define myself by it. I wasn't just someone who liked science. I was someone who needed it to justify my rejection of God. If anyone even suggested that science and faith could coexist, I dismissed them instantly. To me, that was betrayal, compromise, weakness. I had built my identity on the belief that reason and faith were mortal enemies, and I was determined to side with reason at all costs. What I didn't realize was that I had built my house on sand, and cracks were already forming. One of those cracks appeared when I faced personal struggles. Science could explain chemical reactions in my brain, but it couldn't tell me why my heart ached when I felt alone. It could describe the biology of sadness, but it couldn't heal it. It could tell me how humans evolved, but not why my soul longed for meaning. In those moments, I felt an emptiness science couldn't touch, but instead of acknowledging it, I buried myself deeper in pride. I mocked faith louder. I quoted science more aggressively, anything to drown out the voice inside me asking, what if there's more? Looking back, I see how fragile my worldview was. It wasn't built on discovery or truth, but on arrogance and fear. Arrogance, because I thought I knew better than billions of people across history who believed in God. Fear, because I was terrified that they might actually be right. I claimed science gave me peace, but it didn't. It gave me arguments, but not answers. It gave me facts, but not meaning. And no matter how much I clung to it, the emptiness inside me only grew deeper. I was a man holding onto a lifeboat that couldn't float. For years, I told myself that science was enough, that it explained everything worth knowing and anything beyond it didn't matter. But the truth is, I wasn't satisfied. I was restless, even haunted, though I hid it well. I thought my pride made me strong, but in reality, it made me fragile. Every unanswered question felt like a threat. Every believer's quiet peace felt like an accusation. And though I wouldn't admit it then, my heart was already searching for something beyond equations and theories. I just wasn't ready to face the possibility that the God I mocked might actually be real. At some point, my pride hardened into a conviction. I began repeating a phrase as if it were a personal creed. Faith is for the weak. I'll never believe. It was no longer just an opinion. It became part of my identity. I wore those words like armor, convinced they made me stronger, smarter, untouchable. Every time I heard someone talk about prayer or miracles, I felt almost obligated to scoff, as though mocking faith proved my superiority. The more I said it, the more I believed it. But in reality, those words were shaping me into someone cold, arrogant, and increasingly closed off to the world. To me, religion was nothing more than a crutch. I saw believers as people unable to handle life on their own, clinging to fairy tales to avoid facing harsh reality. I would say things like, I don't need God, I have reason, logic, and strength. I convinced myself that needing faith was a sign of weakness, almost like admitting defeat. And because I was determined never to be defeated, I doubled down on rejecting anything spiritual. I thought I was building resilience, but really, I was just masking insecurity with pride. My conviction felt strong, but it was built on sand. I remember once, a close friend opened up to me about their struggles and how faith gave them peace. Instead of listening, I laughed. I told them they were deluding themselves with comforting lies. I could see the hurt in their eyes, but I ignored it. I told myself I was doing them a favor by bringing them back to reality. In truth, I was pushing people away, mistaking cruelty for honesty. My conviction turned me into a wall, incapable of empathy. And behind that wall, I was increasingly alone. The more I declared faith to be weakness, the more I felt pressure to prove I was strong without it. I worked harder, studied more, and tried to appear in control at all times. Failure was not an option, because failure would mean admitting I wasn't enough on my own. Every success felt like a victory against faith. Every achievement was proof, I thought, that I didn't need God. Yet ironically, the higher I climbed on that fragile ladder, the emptier I felt. Pride demanded performance, but it never gave peace. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear a quiet whisper in my thoughts. What if you're wrong? The idea terrified me, so I crushed it instantly. I repeated my creed again. Faith is for the weak. I'll never believe. I clung to it as if saying it enough times would make it true. But the fact that I had to keep repeating it revealed the cracks. If I was so certain, why did I feel the need to convince myself over and over? My words sounded like confidence, but deep down, they were just fear disguised as strength. In arguments, I became more aggressive. I treated faith not just as a disagreement, but as an enemy to be destroyed. I looked for every opportunity to humiliate believers, to prove them wrong. It wasn't enough for me to personally reject God. I wanted everyone else to reject Him too. I told myself this was because I loved truth, but in reality, it was because seeing others believe exposed the weakness in my own conviction. Their quiet faith made my loud denial seem hollow, and I couldn't stand that mirror. What I didn't realize then is that my statement, faith is for the weak, was truer than I knew, just not in the way I thought. Faith is for the weak, for the broken, for those who admit they can't do everything on their own. But instead of seeing that as beautiful, I saw it as shameful. My pride made me despise weakness, even though I was drowning in it myself. By declaring I'd never believe, I wasn't showing strength. I was hiding from the only hope that could actually save me. Over time, my conviction made me bitter. I started resenting people who seemed genuinely joyful in their faith. I told myself they were brainwashed, but a part of me envied their peace. I tried to fill the gap with work, entertainment and distractions, but nothing silenced the ache. The more I rejected faith, the more restless I became. My creed gave me a false sense of identity, but it couldn't give me fulfillment. I was shouting into the void, but the void only echoed back. Looking back, I see that my words were less about rejecting God and more about protecting myself. Deep down, I was afraid of surrendering, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of admitting that I wasn't in control. Saying, "I'll never believe," wasn't courage. It was fear, dressed as defiance. It was the trembling voice of someone terrified that God might actually be real, and that if He was, everything in my life would have to change. Pride made me declare war against faith, but secretly, my heart longed for something greater. In those years, I thought I was building a fortress of certainty, but I was only building a prison. My conviction isolated me from others and left me with nothing but pride to cling to. And pride is a terrible companion. It doesn't comfort you. It doesn't heal you. It doesn't love you. It only whispers, "Keep proving yourself." So I kept shouting my creed into the world. Faith is for the weak. I'll never believe. But in the silence that followed, I was confronted with the truth. The person I was trying hardest to convince wasn't the world. It was me. When I entered adulthood, life seemed to finally reward me for my determination. I got my first real job, one that gave me not only income, but also a sense of purpose. Receiving that first paycheck felt like victory. I told myself, "See, hard work is all you need." I began to build a life around achievements, chasing one milestone after another. Every success was proof, in my mind, that I was strong without faith, that I didn't need God to guide me. My independence became my identity, and I wore it proudly. Work quickly became the center of my world. I poured my energy into long hours, hungry for recognition and advancement. The compliments from colleagues and the praise from my boss fed my pride. Each promotion felt like another argument won against believers. "I did this on my own," I repeated silently. My career became more than a job. It was my trophy case, my shield, my justification for rejecting faith. But beneath the applause, I was already enslaved to ambition. Outside of work, I began to build friendships that revolved around success and pleasure. We celebrated promotions, shared expensive dinners, and laughed about our next goals. In those moments, I felt powerful, as though I had conquered life itself. The bonds seemed real, but they were built on mutual convenience, not depth. We enjoyed each other's company as long as we were winning. I thought these friendships were proof of my independence, but they were fragile, conditional, and easily shaken. Romantic relationships followed the same pattern. I sought connection, but always on my terms. I avoided vulnerability, keeping emotions shallow. I wanted companionship without commitment, pleasure without sacrifice. At first, this gave me a sense of freedom. Nobody could control me. Nobody could weigh me down. But as relationships came and went, I began to sense an emptiness beneath the surface. Independence gave me freedom, but it robbed me of intimacy. I was surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. Independence became my gospel. I told myself that needing anyone, friends, partners, or God, was weakness. The more I stood on my own, the stronger I felt. I paid my own bills, made my own choices, and answered to no one. There was pride in that, but also isolation. I confused independence with self-worth, and the more I tried to prove myself, the more pressure I carried. My achievements were real, but they couldn't fill the quiet ache when I was alone at night. The first taste of success was intoxicating. I bought things I once only dreamed of: a car, new clothes, gadgets that made me feel modern and accomplished. Every purchase gave me a rush of satisfaction, but the feeling never lasted. I told myself, this is freedom, this is life. But as the excitement faded, I had to chase the next thing and the next. Independence had turned into consumerism, and I didn't even notice. I believed I was in control, yet I was already a slave to my desires. People admired me. They said I was responsible, hard-working, reliable. Their approval became another drug. I craved it, needing their validation to confirm my independence was real. I wanted to be seen as successful, as someone who had everything figured out. But deep inside, I knew I didn't. I was constantly performing, afraid that if I stopped striving, people would see the cracks. Independence wasn't giving me rest. It was demanding more and more effort to maintain. At times, I caught myself wondering if this was all there was. Success, friends, relationships, freedom. On the surface, it looked perfect. But in moments of quiet, I felt a hollowness I couldn't explain. Something was missing, but I buried that thought quickly. I told myself it was just a matter of reaching the next level. More money, better friends, a stronger relationship. I believed that independence was the cure for emptiness, even though it was often the cause. I laughed at faith during this season of life. To me, believers were wasting time in prayer while I was conquering the world. I thought I was winning the game of life while they were stuck in fantasy. But what I didn't realize was that I was building a tower without a foundation. It looked impressive, but it couldn't withstand the storms that were coming. My independence was an illusion, fragile, temporary, and dangerously deceiving. Looking back now, I see those first achievements as both a gift and a trap. They gave me confidence, but also fed my pride. They gave me freedom, but also deepened my chains. I mistook independence for fulfillment, and in doing so, I drifted further away from the only one who could truly satisfy me. At the time, I thought I was rising higher than ever, but in reality, I was setting the stage for the fall that was waiting ahead. I thought I had everything I wanted: a stable job, money in my account, friends to spend weekends with, and even the admiration of people who said I was going places. On paper, my life looked perfect. But when I laid in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the question, why doesn't this feel like enough? Success filled my calendar, but it didn't fill my heart. No matter how much I achieved, the satisfaction evaporated quickly, leaving behind a restlessness I couldn't explain. The emptiness grew louder the more I tried to ignore it. I bought things I didn't need, hoping new possessions would spark joy. For a few hours they did, but by the next morning, the thrill was gone. I chased relationships for comfort, but they felt shallow, temporary, and unsteady. I threw myself into work again, hoping achievement would drown out the nagging ache inside me. But every time I hit a goal, the silence afterwards screamed louder than the applause that came with it. It was confusing because I had convinced myself for years that independence was the ultimate prize. And here I was, living independently, free, respected, even envied by others. Yet something felt wrong. I looked at people of faith and told myself they were weak, but deep down I envied their peace. They had something I didn't, something money, friends, or freedom couldn't give me. And the more I pretended I didn't care, the more the cracks inside me widened. I began to notice it in small moments. When I laughed with friends, part of me felt like I was acting. When I smiled at work, it was more performance than joy. Even in relationships, I felt distant, like I was playing a role rather than truly connecting. It was as if I was living two lives, the one everyone else saw, full of success and strength, and the one inside, quietly starving for something I couldn't name. And the gap between them was slowly tearing me apart. At night, doubts crept in. What if success isn't enough? What if this isn't all there is? I hated those questions because I didn't have answers. I buried them with distractions, movies, parties, late-night scrolling, anything to avoid silence. Silence scared me because in silence the emptiness was undeniable. I told myself it was just a phase, that once I reached the next milestone, the feeling would go away. But it didn't. It only deepened. The irony was painful. I had always mocked people of faith, saying they used God as a crutch. Yet here I was, leaning on work, money, and relationships as my own crutches. And none of them could hold me up. They wobbled, broke, and left me more unsteady than before. I had built my life on independence, but I was starting to realize that independence couldn't heal loneliness. It couldn't give meaning. It couldn't give peace. I remember one night lying awake, staring into the darkness and whispering to myself, "Is this it?" It was the first time I allowed myself to admit that I wasn't satisfied. That thought scared me more than anything, because if independence wasn't enough, then what was left? I didn't dare consider faith. It was still the enemy in my mind. So instead, I just sat with the ache, trying to convince myself I could live with it. But it kept growing. The cracks began to show in my relationships too. Friends noticed I was restless, distracted. I laughed less, joked less. Some drifted away, sensing something was off. My romantic relationship at the time started to suffer. My partner told me I seemed distant, unreachable, like my heart wasn't truly in it. She was right. I was there physically, but absent emotionally, and I didn't know how to fix it. I couldn't even explain what was wrong, because I didn't understand it myself. Every time I tried to reassure myself, I circled back to the same emptiness. I told myself, maybe the next promotion, maybe the next big purchase, maybe the next relationship will fill the gap. But no matter what I added, the void remained. I began to feel like a fraud, smiling on the outside while hollow on the inside. It was exhausting to keep up appearances, and slowly the weight of pretending was crushing me. Looking back, I see those cracks as mercy. At the time they felt like weakness, like failure, but they were really warning signs, reminders that no amount of independence, success, or pleasure could ever satisfy the deepest parts of my soul. I didn't recognize it then, but those cracks were the beginning of God's work in me. They were small, quiet, and painful, but they were necessary. Because without the cracks, I never would have realized how much I needed something greater. She was one of the few people who got close enough to see through my mask. At first, our relationship felt exciting. Fun dates, late-night talks, plans for the future. But as time went on, she started to notice the emptiness I tried so hard to hide. She would ask me what I really wanted in life, and I never had a clear answer. I dodged the question, made jokes, or changed the subject. Deep down, I knew I didn't have a purpose, but I was too proud to admit it. The cracks between us began to show slowly. She wanted depth, vulnerability, and emotional connection, but I couldn't give her that. My walls were too high. I convinced myself that keeping distance made me strong, but really it just made me cold. She would tell me, "You don't let anyone in," and I would brush it off with a laugh, but her words pierced me because they were true. I just didn't want to face it. Arguments started to replace conversations. She accused me of being emotionally unavailable, of living only for myself. I told her she was exaggerating, but deep inside I knew she was right. I was selfish, always chasing work, achievements, or distractions, never fully present with her. She wanted a partner who could love with purpose, but I barely understood what purpose even meant. The more she pushed for connection, the more I pulled away. One night, it all came crashing down. She sat across from me, tears in her eyes, and said, "You don't love me. You don't love anyone. You're just surviving, chasing nothing." Her words hit like a punch. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I couldn't. She saw through me. She exposed the emptiness I had been denying. For the first time, I realized my life wasn't just empty for me, it was hurting the people around me too. The breakup was messy and painful. She left saying she couldn't stay with someone so cold, so distant, so without direction. Watching her walk away was like watching a mirror of my life shatter. I had always told myself I was strong because I didn't need anyone. But when she left, I felt the weight of loneliness press down harder than ever. My so-called independence suddenly felt like abandonment. In the weeks after, I replayed her words over and over in my head. Cold, empty, no purpose. They echoed like a cruel refrain. I tried to bury myself in work again, but the sting was always there. Her leaving didn't just end a relationship, it exposed the truth I'd been running from. I wasn't just unsatisfied with life, I was incapable of truly giving or receiving love. That realization shook me more than I expected. I wanted to blame her, to say she demanded too much, but I couldn't. Everything she said was true. I was emotionally numb, living for nothing deeper than the next paycheck or distraction. I thought independence made me strong, but it only made me unreachable. I thought success defined me, but it only highlighted my lack of meaning. Losing her was like losing the last thread tying me to a sense of normalcy. Nights became harder after she left. I lay in bed, replaying moments where I could have chosen differently, where I could have opened up, shared more, loved better. But every scene ended the same way. Me shutting down, me retreating behind walls, me choosing pride over vulnerability. I realized I had sabotaged something good, and I didn't even know why. It was as if emptiness had taken control of my life, dictating every choice I made. Her departure left me facing a truth I couldn't escape. I was lost. I had no real direction, no real passion, and no real ability to connect. Everything I built, work, friendships, independence, suddenly felt meaningless. She had seen the truth long before I was willing to admit it, and by the time I finally did, it was too late. The emptiness that had been a whisper was now a roar. Looking back, I see that breakup as a turning point. At the time, it felt like punishment, like life was unfairly tearing away my comfort. But now I understand it was another crack in the walls I built, another piece of my false foundation breaking apart. Her words were painful, but they were also true, and though I hated them then, I know now they were preparing me for the moment when God would finally break through. I always claimed not to believe in God, but after she left I found myself cursing his name anyway. It made no sense. I told everyone he didn't exist, yet in my anger, I blamed him for the emptiness in my life. I would look up at the ceiling at night and spit out words like, "If you're real, you're cruel. You take everything away." It felt strange, almost hypocritical, but the anger needed a target. And somehow, God became that target, even though I claimed he was nothing more than a fantasy. The more things went wrong, the more I blamed him. When a project at work failed, I muttered that it was his fault. When friendships faded, I whispered curses toward the sky. It was as if I couldn't accept the possibility that I was the problem. so I projected all the blame onto someone I didn't even believe was there. In my twisted logic, if there was a God, then he was responsible for everything collapsing around me. I remember walking home one evening, furious after a fight with a close friend. I stopped in the middle of the street, fists clenched, and shouted into the night, "Why are you doing this to me?" People passing by probably thought I was crazy, yelling at the air, but in that moment, it didn't matter. My pride wouldn't let me admit I was weak, so I wrapped my weakness in anger and threw it at the heavens. There were nights when the anger turned into mockery again. I would scoff and say, "If you're real, you must enjoy watching me suffer." Sometimes I would laugh bitterly, daring him to strike me down, daring him to prove himself in some dramatic way. But beneath the sarcasm there was pain. I wasn't laughing because I thought it was funny. I was laughing because I didn't know how else to deal with the loneliness eating me alive. The strangest part was how natural it felt to blame God. I had built my identity on rejecting him, yet when my life fell apart, he was the first one I accused. Maybe deep down, I'd always known he was real, but I didn't want to admit it. Maybe anger was easier than faith, because anger let me stay in control. If I could accuse God, then I didn't have to face my own emptiness. Still, the anger grew. Every disappointment, every loss, every sleepless night became fuel for my rage. I would pace the room, speaking to the darkness, demanding answers from a God I claimed wasn't listening. I told myself I hated him, but the truth was, I hated what my life had become. He was just the easiest one to pin it all on. My pride couldn't bear to admit that I had built my life on sand. There was a twisted comfort in blaming him. It gave me someone to fight against, someone to direct all the frustration toward. But deep down it was exhausting. Rage doesn't heal, it only burns. And the more I lashed out at God, the more I felt like I was burning inside. The anger left me drained, bitter, and even more alone than before. But I kept feeding it because I didn't know what else to do. Sometimes in rare, quiet moments, I would wonder if my anger meant something. If I didn't believe in God, then why was I so furious at him? Why did I talk to him at all? I would push those thoughts away quickly, telling myself it was just habit or just a way of venting. But the truth haunted me. Maybe my rage was proof that I knew he was there, and I just didn't want to face him. The people around me noticed the change. I was sharper, colder, angrier. Friends pulled away, saying I was too negative, too bitter. I didn't care. I told myself I didn't need anyone. But the more I pushed people away, the more I realized I was isolating myself into a corner where only my anger kept me company. It was a dark, miserable place, but it was the only thing I felt I had left. Looking back, I see that my anger was really a cry for help. I wanted God to answer me, to explain why my life was unraveling. But because he didn't respond in the way I demanded, I mistook his silence for cruelty. I thought he was punishing me, when in reality, he was waiting for me to finally let go of the pride, the anger, the lies I told myself. But at that time, I wasn't ready. All I knew was blame, and I threw it at him with everything I had. The accident came out of nowhere, like a punch I never saw coming. One rainy evening, I was driving home after another long, angry day, barely paying attention to the road. My mind was consumed with bitterness, replaying every failure, every loss. Suddenly, the car skidded on the slick pavement, spinning out of control. In that split second, everything slowed down. I remember the screech of tires, the violent crash of metal, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by shattered glass and the smell of smoke. My body ached in ways I had never felt before, sharp pain shooting through my ribs and legs. People were shouting outside, trying to help. I couldn't move much, only groan in disbelief. For a moment I thought this was it, that I had finally met the end I sometimes wished for in my darkest thoughts. But somehow, I was still alive. The doctors told me it was a miracle I survived. The car was totaled, bent like a crushed can. Anyone who saw the wreck couldn't believe I made it out. But survival came with a price. My body wasn't the same anymore. I was left with constant pain, limited movement, and weeks of physical therapy ahead. I had always seen myself as strong, independent, unstoppable. Now I couldn't even walk without help. The fragility hit me harder than the accident itself. I hated needing assistance, hated relying on others for simple things. Even getting out of bed was a battle. Every ache in my body was a reminder of how quickly life could break. I had spent years mocking faith and claiming control of my destiny. But one spin of the wheels proved how fragile I really was. It humbled me, though I didn't want to admit it. At night, lying in a hospital bed, I felt anger and fear mixed together. I asked myself over and over, why didn't I die? For someone who claimed not to care about life, survival felt like a cruel joke. I was trapped in a broken body, drowning in bitterness. Part of me thought maybe this was punishment, God's way of laughing at me. The thought filled me with rage, but also with a strange, unexplainable fear. Recovery was slow and humiliating. I had to learn patience, though I had none. I would stumble during therapy, fists clenched in frustration, cursing under my breath. I pushed people away even when they tried to help. Pain consumed my days, but so did pride. I refused to see the accident as a wake-up call. I treated it like a personal attack from the universe or from God himself, if he was really there. But the truth was, the accident stripped me of the illusions I had built. I was no longer untouchable, no longer in control. Every limitation, every struggle reminded me of my weakness. The man who once mocked others for needing God was now unable to stand on his own 2 feet. That irony wasn't lost on me. Even though I tried to bury it under sarcasm and anger, there were moments when fear crept in. What if I never fully recovered? What if this was my new reality forever? The thought of living in constant pain terrified me. I had always said death didn't scare me, but that wasn't true. Lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was afraid. Afraid of the unknown, afraid of being powerless, afraid of facing something bigger than myself. I tried to drown those thoughts out by blaming God even more. If you're real, this is your fault, I whispered bitterly. You kept me alive just to torture me. The words left my mouth with venom, but deep down, I wondered why I even said them. If he wasn't real, why talk to him at all? Maybe the accident had cracked something deeper inside me than just bones. Maybe it cracked the walls around my heart too. Looking back now, I see that the accident wasn't just about survival. It was the first step toward breaking me down. At the time, I only felt pain, humiliation, and rage. But that crash forced me to confront my fragility, something I had denied my whole life. It was as if God was whispering, "You're not as strong as you think." I didn't want to hear it then, but that was the moment the process truly began. Lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't stop replaying the words I had once spoken so proudly. "I'll never believe again." It echoed in my mind like a curse I had placed on myself. Every time the nurses left the room and I was alone, those words grew louder. I had shouted them in defiance years ago, thinking I was strong, thinking I was free from the chains of faith. Now, they haunted me like chains I had wrapped around my own neck. I remembered the exact moment I first said it. I was younger, arrogant, sitting in a debate with friends who still believed. I laughed and declared, "Faith is for the weak. I'll never believe again." The room went quiet then, but I felt powerful. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. Yet in that hospital bed, with IVs in my arms and pain radiating through my body, I didn't feel powerful anymore. I felt small, fragile, and cornered. The irony stung. Here I was, swearing off God forever, only to find myself talking to him in anger night after night. I said I'd never believe, yet the first name on my lips in the darkest hours was his. My pride tried to ignore the contradiction, but my soul knew better. The very fact that I was angry at God proved I believed he was there. You don't scream at someone who doesn't exist. That realization terrified me. If God was real, then I wasn't just suffering from bad luck, I was living under his watch. And if he had allowed me to survive this wreck, maybe he was the one who put me there in the first place. That thought poisoned me. I couldn't see grace, I could only see punishment. "I'll never believe again," I whispered through clenched teeth, as if repeating it would protect me from him. But the more I repeated it, the less I believed it myself. Deep down, I knew those words were hollow. They were a shield I hid behind, a defense against the possibility that God had been chasing me all along. Still, my pride refused to admit it. I would rather suffer, rather curse, rather break apart piece by piece than confess that I needed him. That stubbornness became my companion as much as the pain. Sometimes, late at night, I caught myself bargaining in whispers. "If you're real, prove it. If you're real, explain why I'm here." Then I would stop suddenly, shaking my head, furious at myself. "No, I'll never believe again," I'd say louder, as if silencing my own heart. It was like fighting a war inside of me, part of me screaming for proof, the other part determined to stay in rebellion no matter the cost. The nurses noticed I was restless. They said I seemed angry all the time, that I clenched my fists even in sleep. They didn't know it was because every dream was filled with reminders of my failures, my arrogance, my curse of unbelief. I had turned my declaration into an identity, and now that identity was crumbling. The man who mocked others for faith was secretly haunted by it. I hated myself for remembering that vow. It was supposed to make me strong, untouchable, free. Instead, it mocked me, reminding me that I had spoken words I couldn't take back. The more I thought about it, the more powerless I felt. My words had boxed me into a corner where admitting my need for God felt impossible. I was trapped, not by his absence, but by my own prideful oath. The nights were the worst, with no distractions, no visitors, and only the sound of machines beeping. The silence became suffocating. That was when the vow echoed the loudest. "I'll never believe again." It felt less like a choice and more like a sentence. I wondered if God had taken me at my word, if he was letting me drown in loneliness because I told him I didn't want him. The thought chilled me to my core. Looking back, I see that vow for what it really was. Not strength, but fear. I said I'd never believe again because I was afraid of what belief would demand from me, afraid of surrender, afraid of admitting I wasn't in control. In the hospital, broken and weak, that fear surfaced again. But God was already breaking through it, even then. I didn't know it at the time, but those words I cursed myself with were the very chains he was preparing to shatter. At first, I thought my friends would stick around. They sent a few messages after the accident, promising to visit, promising to check in. But as the days stretched into weeks, the messages slowed down. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I told myself they were busy, that life goes on. Still, deep down, I felt the sting. The people I had once laughed with, partied with, leaned on for distraction. Suddenly, they weren't there anymore. The hospital room became my world. 4 walls, the beeping of machines, the occasional nurse. When visiting hours came and went with no familiar faces, I felt invisible. I'd always prided myself on being surrounded by people, but the truth was, they weren't real companions. They liked me when I was strong, when I had money, when I could make them laugh. Now that I was broken, they vanished like smoke. Nights were the hardest. Silence pressed in on me like a heavy blanket. I would stare at the ceiling, hearing the echo of my own breathing, realizing no one was coming. The loneliness cut deeper than the physical pain. It was one thing to recover from broken bones. It was another to feel like my life had no one left in it. That's when the weight of my choices really started to sink in. I remembered the girlfriend who had left me, accusing me of being cold and empty. Back then, I brushed it off, called her dramatic, said I didn't need anyone. But lying there, abandoned by friends, I realized her words had been true. I had pushed people away for years, hiding behind pride and mocking faith. Now I was paying the price. The life I built on arrogance had crumbled, and there was no one left to pick up the pieces. There's a unique kind of pain in realizing people only cared when you were useful. I was no longer the guy with energy, with resources, with something to offer. I was just a burden. I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need them. But that was a lie. Every empty night proved otherwise. I longed for someone to sit by my side, to tell me I wasn't forgotten. But no one came. The silence started to eat at me. I tried distracting myself with TV, with books, with anything I could reach. But nothing filled the void. The loneliness was louder than all of it. Sometimes I caught myself whispering into the darkness, talking to no one, just to hear a voice in the room. Other times, I closed my eyes and prayed. Though I refused to admit it was prayer, I would just murmur, "Why am I alone?" to the ceiling. Anger grew out of that loneliness. I blamed my friends for abandoning me, blamed my ex for leaving, blamed the world for moving on without me, and beneath it all, I blamed God. "If you're real, why did you leave me with nothing?" I spat those words through clenched teeth, tears burning my eyes. It was strange. Even in my rejection, I couldn't stop addressing him. Loneliness made me reach out to the very one I claimed didn't exist. Days turned into weeks, and my bitterness grew heavier. Nurses came and went, but they were just doing their jobs. No one cared about me beyond the charts and checklists. I began to believe I was truly invisible, that my life had no meaning. The thought of being forgotten terrified me more than pain or death ever could. I started to wonder if maybe this was God's way of showing me what hell felt like. Utter isolation. Sometimes I replayed old memories, the laughter of friends, the warmth of being surrounded by people. It felt like a different life, a dream I had woken up from. I wondered if I had ever truly belonged anywhere, or if I had always been alone, fooling myself with shallow connections. That realization crushed me. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be empty, not physically, but in the soul. Looking back now, that isolation was necessary. It stripped me of every illusion, every crutch I leaned on instead of God. At the time, I hated it. I thought I was cursed, abandoned, destroyed. But that silence, that loneliness, created space for something new to happen. It was in the emptiness that I would finally hear a voice greater than my own. I just didn't know it yet. The loneliness eventually turned into rage. I couldn't stand the silence anymore, and I couldn't stand the idea that if God was real, he was just sitting back watching me suffer. One night, I clenched my fists and whispered through tears, "If you're real, you must hate me." It felt like venom leaving my mouth, but also like a confession I couldn't hold back. I wasn't just angry at life, I was angry at him. I thought about everything I had lost. My job, my relationship, my health, my friends. It was as if every piece of stability had been ripped out from under me. How could one person go through so much at once? My bitterness grew sharper and my heart turned colder. I started to believe God had singled me out for destruction. "You want to break me? Well, congratulations," I muttered into the dark. Sometimes I would scream into my pillow, not caring if anyone heard. The pain inside was boiling over, and anger was the only way I knew how to deal with it. "If you're real, then you're cruel," I spat. "If you're real, then you've abandoned me." These words poured out night after night, my rebellion wrapped in grief. I didn't know it then, but even in my fury, I was reaching toward him. There were nights when I felt like I was daring God to answer me. I would glare at the ceiling, daring him to strike me down, to prove he existed. "Go ahead," I'd whisper. "Show me how much you hate me." It was twisted logic, but in my brokenness I believed it. To me, pain was proof of his hostility. I couldn't imagine that pain could be allowed by love. The bitterness poisoned everything. I saw no beauty in the sunrise, no comfort in the voices of others, no point in getting out of bed. My body was healing slowly, but my soul was rotting. Every day felt like punishment. Every hour felt like proof that God was real and against me. I would mutter, "You're not silent, you're cruel," and then choke back tears, angry at myself for even addressing him at all. I began to replay all the times I had mocked believers, all the times I had sworn I'd never believe again. I laughed bitterly at the irony. Maybe this was God's revenge, his way of putting me in my place. "You wanted proof," I hissed. "Well, here it is. Proof that he can ruin a man's life in an instant." I twisted every hardship into evidence that he despised me. Anger was the only thing that gave me strength to face the days. Without it, I would have collapsed, so I clung to it like armor. But the truth is, it wasn't protecting me. It was consuming me. I started to feel hollow inside, as if rage was burning through everything I had left. Still, I kept repeating that same phrase over and over. "If you're real, you must hate me." The strange thing is, every time I said it, I expected something. A lightning bolt, a voice, some kind of confirmation that he heard me. But nothing came, only silence, and that silence made me angrier. "Coward," I whispered. "If you're real, then answer me." I was a man shaking his fist at the sky, demanding attention from the very God I claimed I didn't believe in. I told myself I would never bow down, never admit weakness, never surrender to some invisible deity. But in reality, I already had. My every thought, my every word was centered on him. Hatred kept me talking to the God I said I rejected. It was a strange kind of devotion, one born from fury instead of faith. And yet, it kept me tethered to him in ways I didn't understand. Looking back now, I see that anger as part of the process. At the time, I thought I was proving my strength by accusing God. But what I was really doing was tearing down the walls of my pride. My rage was the beginning of my confession, even if I didn't know it yet. Because to scream, "If you're real, you must hate me," was to admit that deep down, I already knew he was real. There came a point when the anger burned out, and what was left was emptiness. I didn't even have the energy to shout at God anymore. I would just lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how pointless everything felt. My body was healing, but my soul was collapsing. I couldn't see a future. I couldn't even see tomorrow. It was like staring into a tunnel with no end, only darkness, hopelessness wrapped around me like chains. Even small things, like hearing laughter in the hallway or seeing a sunrise through the window, hurt me. They were reminders of a life I no longer had, of joy I couldn't feel. I began to think maybe I didn't deserve happiness. Maybe this was who I was now, broken, forgotten, useless. The thought settled in my chest like a stone, and I stopped fighting it. My mind grew darker with each passing night. I started imagining what it would be like if I just stopped. No more pain, no more loneliness, no more questions. The thought scared me at first, but the more it returned, the more it started to feel like an option. I had always mocked people who called life a gift. Now I couldn't see the gift at all. Life felt like a curse. I began to avoid mirrors, because every time I saw my reflection, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Hollow eyes, a broken body, a spirit that looked defeated. It was like staring at a stranger. I hated him. I hated what I had become. I told myself that if this was life, it wasn't worth living. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed. The last time I had truly felt alive. There were nights when I cried quietly, not wanting the nurses to hear. I would bury my face in the pillow and whisper things I never thought I would say. I don't want to wake up tomorrow. It terrified me to admit it, but it also felt like relief. Finally, I was being honest about the depth of my despair. I didn't want to keep fighting. I didn't want to keep existing in this void. The silence of the room made it worse. Every tick of the clock reminded me how slowly time was moving. Every second felt heavier than the last. I would close my eyes and beg for sleep to last longer, so I wouldn't have to face the waking hours. But even sleep betrayed me, filling my mind with restless dreams. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape the darkness pressing in. I thought about the people who used to be in my life, friends, family, my ex-girlfriend. I wondered if anyone would even notice if I disappeared. The truth that haunted me was this: maybe no one would. Maybe my absence wouldn't matter. That thought crushed me more than the pain in my body ever could. To be alive and feel invisible was worse than death itself. Anger had at least kept me fighting, but now that anger was gone, I felt weightless, like a leaf about to fall into nothingness. The bitterness had drained me, leaving only despair. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about recovery, about the future, about anything. The thought that used to terrify me, giving up, now started to feel comforting. Maybe letting go was the only way out. In those moments, I felt as though I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Behind me was everything I had lost, and in front of me was a void I couldn't see the bottom of. Part of me wanted to jump, to end the suffering. Part of me wanted someone, anyone, to pull me back. But no one was there. I was alone on the edge, staring into darkness, unsure if I had the strength to keep standing. Looking back, I can see how close I was to surrendering everything. At the time, I didn't think there was any light left. I didn't know that the very place I called the end would become the beginning of something new. But in those nights, in that pit of despair, I was convinced it was over. I thought my story had ended. I had no idea that God was just about to write a new chapter. That night was different from the others. I couldn't hold the weight inside me anymore, and the tears came like a flood. I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the dim light above, and for the first time I spoke out loud, not in anger, but in desperation. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Why? Why is this happening?" The words felt weak, but they were all I had. I wasn't praying, at least not in the way believers do. I was just a broken man begging for answers. The tears wouldn't stop. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to muffle the sound, but it was no use. My whole body shook with sobs. I felt like a child again, vulnerable and exposed, with no walls left to hide behind. I had always mocked faith, mocked weakness, but in that moment I was weaker than I had ever been. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to be strong. I just wanted relief. The words tumbled out of me almost without thought. "God, if you're there, why me?" I felt foolish as soon as I said it. I had built my whole life on denying him, and yet here I was, calling out into the silence of the night. It wasn't belief, it was desperation. I didn't expect an answer. I just wanted someone or something to hear me. I couldn't bear the thought of being invisible anymore. I gripped the sheets tightly, almost like holding onto them would keep me from slipping away completely. My chest ached, not just from my injuries, but from the emptiness gnawing at my soul. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. "I don't have anything left." The sound of my own voice startled me. It didn't sound like me at all. It sounded like a man at the very end, a man with nothing left to fight for. As I lay there, I thought about the countless times I had laughed at believers, the countless times I had said, "Faith is for the weak." Now here I was, proving my own words wrong, because I was weak, weaker than I had ever been. And in that weakness, I felt this strange urge to reach out beyond myself, even though I didn't know who or what I was reaching for. I stared at the ceiling through blurry eyes and muttered again, "If you're real, I need you." It shocked me to say it. I didn't even know why those words came out of my mouth. It wasn't a prayer, not really. It was a confession of defeat, a surrender to the possibility that I couldn't carry everything on my own. For a man who had lived with pride, it was like breathing out poison. The room felt heavier after that. The silence grew thick, almost tangible, as if the air itself was listening. I waited, half expecting nothing, half dreading something. My mind raced. What if no one was out there? What if I was truly talking to myself? But beneath that doubt, there was a spark, a tiny, fragile hope that maybe I wasn't alone, that maybe, just maybe, someone heard me. I thought about death again, about the escape it promised, but this time there was a new tension inside me. I didn't just want an ending anymore, I wanted an answer. I didn't want to vanish into nothingness. I wanted to know if there was something, someone beyond this pain. The more I cried, the clearer it became. I wasn't just weeping out of despair. I was weeping out of longing. By then, I had no more words. My throat was raw, my chest was tight, and all I could do was cry quietly into the night. But inside I was begging for a sign, for relief, for proof that I wasn't abandoned. I didn't know if God cared, or if he even existed, but my heart was crying out louder than my voice ever could. It was the most honest moment of my life. Looking back, I realized that night was the first time I truly reached beyond myself. I didn't know it then, but those broken whispers were the beginning of something. I had spent years mocking believers for their prayers, but in my own darkest moment, I found myself doing the same. It wasn't faith yet, it was the cry of a desperate soul. But sometimes, that's where faith begins. When the last of my tears slowed down, the room grew quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence I had known all those nights before. It felt heavier somehow, thicker, almost alive. I could hear the faint beeping of the machines, the hum of the air conditioner, but behind those sounds there was something deeper, something I couldn't explain. I didn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't the only one in that room. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe exhaustion was making me imagine things. But the longer I lay there, the stronger it grew. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't cold. It was a silence that wrapped around me, pressing against me, not to crush me, but to make me stop and listen. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. I waited for thunder, for some dramatic sign. I wanted lightning to strike, a voice to shake the walls, something undeniable. But none of that came. Instead, what I felt was something subtle, something gentle, and strangely, it was more powerful than anything I could have imagined, because it went past my eyes, past my ears, and straight into my chest. The stillness seemed to echo inside me. My racing thoughts slowed down. The anger, the despair, the bitterness, all of it felt like it was being hushed, like someone was telling my soul to be quiet. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't fighting against myself. I just lay there, breathing slowly, aware that something unseen was brushing against me. I remember whispering into that silence, "Is this you?" My own voice startled me. It felt ridiculous, like I was talking to the air, but deep down, I didn't feel ridiculous. I felt acknowledged. It was as if the silence itself responded not with words, but with presence. That's when I realized sometimes silence says more than noise ever could. The strangest part was the peace that came with it. I had been drowning in turmoil for so long that I'd forgotten what peace felt like. But in that silence, I tasted it again. Not the peace of everything being perfect, but the peace of not being alone. It was faint, fragile, but it was real, and it was enough to keep me breathing that night. Every doubt I had tried to throw up as a shield suddenly seemed small. All my arguments, all my mocking words about God and faith felt empty in the weight of that silence. I had no clever response, no intellectual excuse. All I had was a feeling I couldn't deny, and that terrified me because it meant maybe I had been wrong all along. I lay there for what felt like hours, just listening, just being still. The hospital room didn't change, but I did. Something deep inside me shifted, though I couldn't define it yet. The silence wasn't absence, it was presence. A presence that was patient, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to soften, and I did. Against all my pride, I did. By then, my tears had dried, but my eyes were still wide open. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dreaming. I was simply aware in a way I had never been before. I couldn't prove it to anyone. I couldn't capture it in words, but I knew that something was with me in that room, and that knowing was both frightening and comforting at the same time. Looking back, that silence was the first answer I ever received. Not an answer of logic or explanation, but an answer of presence. It didn't erase my pain, but it told me I wasn't abandoned. It didn't fix my life, but it whispered that maybe my life wasn't over. It was subtle, but it was undeniable, and it was only the beginning. He lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, convinced he had lost everything that made life worth living. But in that stillness, a strange warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't physical, like medication easing pain, but deeper, reaching places painkillers never could. His breathing slowed, and the restless storm of thoughts went quiet. For the first time in years, silence wasn't heavy. It was gentle. The shadows in his mind didn't vanish, but they softened. His tears, still fresh on his cheeks, no longer tasted of despair. Something invisible, something unexplainable, seemed to rest over him. He whispered, "What is this?" knowing no one would answer. Yet the silence felt like an answer in itself. The peace didn't erase his past. It didn't undo the betrayal, the failures, or the scars that still ached. But it carried a weight stronger than his grief, a presence that made the pain feel less final. His heart, which had been hardened by anger and doubt, suddenly felt fragile, as though walls were crumbling inside. He tried to resist, telling himself it was weakness, maybe even a trick of exhaustion. But the feeling only grew steadier, as though wrapping him in invisible arms. He remembered all the times he cursed God, all the nights he shouted into the void. "If you're real, you must hate me," he had once said. Yet here, in the quiet, it didn't feel like hate at all. His mind raced back to his words, his oath, "I'll never believe again." He almost laughed bitterly. How could he explain this? This wasn't belief. He wasn't praying, wasn't reciting verses, wasn't even trying to reach for God. This peace came uninvited, almost intrusive, as if someone had stepped into the locked room of his soul. He turned his head to the side, ashamed of the tears still dripping. For years, he had seen emotion as weakness. Yet now, the tears seemed different, not of defeat, but of release. He whispered, "Why now? Why me?" His voice broke, but instead of despair, there was a strange, trembling hope. The hospital lights hummed faintly above him, and he could hear the distant beeps of other machines in nearby rooms. Life was continuing around him, yet it felt as though time itself had slowed for him alone. He wasn't healed, his body still ached, his mind still carried scars, but the fear had loosened its grip. For years, he had believed no one cared, that he had been abandoned. Yet in that moment, he felt seen, not by doctors or nurses, not even by family who had drifted away. It was something deeper, older, eternal. He couldn't name it, but he couldn't deny it either. He remembered his revolt against God, the curses he hurled when everything collapsed. If there truly was a God, why hadn't he answered then? Why wait until now when everything was broken? The thought burned him, but strangely, it didn't ignite rage this time. Instead, he felt like a child asking a question too big to understand. His heart whispered a truth he had avoided for years. Maybe God had been there all along, even in silence. The idea scared him because it meant he wasn't alone, not even in the darkest nights. It meant his pain had been witnessed, not ignored. The peace stayed with him through the night. Every time fear tried to rise, the warmth returned, steady and unshaken. He couldn't explain it. Science would call it a psychological shift. Doctors might call it trauma response. But he knew it was more. It was too precise, too personal, too present. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to argue or prove anything. He simply let it be. It was as though the universe whispered, "Rest. You're not forgotten." Those words didn't erase his bitterness, but they planted a seed. And for the first time, he wanted that seed to grow. Sleep came, but not the heavy, restless kind he usually endured. This time it was calm, almost sacred, as if someone was guarding him while he closed his eyes. He dreamt not of pain, not of broken relationships or failures, but of light, a light that didn't blind, but embraced. When he awoke hours later, the pain was still there, but so was the peace. He blinked, expecting it to vanish like a fragile dream, but it lingered. "This can't be real," he whispered. Yet he couldn't shake the certainty that something had shifted inside him forever. The next morning, a nurse entered and commented on how rested he looked. He smiled faintly, surprising even himself. He hadn't smiled genuinely in years. She left, and he sat in silence, thinking. His old self would dismiss this as coincidence, nothing more than exhaustion catching up. But deep inside, he knew better. This wasn't coincidence. It was too real, too alive. And though he didn't dare call it God, not yet, he knew it was pointing him towards something beyond himself, something he wasn't ready to name, but couldn't deny. His mind went back to his youth, when faith was something people around him held on to, but he mocked. He remembered scoffing at those who prayed, who believed in unseen things. He had called them naive, weak, desperate, and now here he was, clinging to a peace he couldn't explain. The irony wasn't lost on him. But instead of shame, he felt something softer, humility. Perhaps life had broken him not to destroy him, but to strip away the illusions. Perhaps this was what he had been running from all along. The thought was terrifying, but also strangely freeing. He lay back, closing his eyes again. The hospital room, once a place of loneliness and despair, now felt almost sacred. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if this peace would stay. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't the same as yesterday. Something had shifted. Something had awakened. And though his lips trembled to form the words, he finally whispered, almost inaudibly, "If this is you, don't let go." He froze as the words echoed inside him. They were not audible in the room, yet they carried more weight than thunder. "I never left you." The phrase sank into his chest, breaking through years of anger and disbelief. His eyes widened, unsure if it was a hallucination brought by exhaustion, but something in those words carried warmth, authority, and tenderness all at once. His tears fell harder, not from pain, but from recognition of something greater. Could it be real? Could it be him, the God he had rejected for so long? The hospital room seemed brighter, almost lighter. For the first time, he did not feel abandoned. He wanted to doubt it, to rationalize it as his imagination. Yet the peace did not leave. Instead, it deepened, wrapping around him like a blanket he had longed for his entire life. The phrase kept replaying in his soul, "I never left you." Memories rushed through his mind. Childhood prayers, his mother's soft voice reading scriptures, nights when he begged for help and thought no one listened. Now it all made sense. Maybe he had not been ignored. Maybe he had been carried all along. His chest heaved as he whispered to the empty room, "Is it really you?" He did not expect an answer, but silence no longer felt like absence. The bitterness he had nursed for years began to loosen its grip. Every accusation he once hurled against heaven now seemed fragile, shallow in comparison to this sudden presence. He remembered screaming at the ceiling after the accident, accusing God of hatred. But here, in this fragile body, he felt something opposite, love that did not condemn him but invited him. It was almost unbearable. He covered his face with trembling hands. "Why would you stay?" he whispered. His voice cracked, broken by shame. Yet, in that moment, he knew he was not despised. He was pursued. Hours seemed to pass differently under that presence. Nurses came and went, machines beeped, but his attention was elsewhere. Deep inside, something shifted. The walls of pride, anger, and disbelief were breaking. He thought of every moment he had cursed God's name, every time he mocked believers, every dark night when he chose despair over hope. And yet, the words remained steady. "I never left you." Not even his rejection could erase the relentless pursuit of grace. He realized this was not weakness, it was mercy. He had been wrong all along, and that realization broke him more than pain ever could. Memories of his failed relationships, broken friendships, and lonely nights now came back differently. He saw not only his mistakes, but also subtle ways he had been preserved. Times when he could have died, but survived. Times when despair could have consumed him, but didn't. It was as though an invisible hand had been guiding, protecting, even in silence. He thought about the accident, how survival was almost impossible, yet here he was. Was this the proof he had demanded all along? Not in thunder, not in miracles, but in survival and unseen care. His lips quivered as he whispered, "Forgive me." The peace intensified. He had expected punishment, but instead he felt cleansing. The weight on his chest began to lift, as though his soul had been carrying stones for years, and now they were being removed one by one. He realized forgiveness was not a theory. It was a person, present in that room, touching his life. His tears became sobs, but not of despair. They were of release, of surrender. "I don't deserve you," he cried. Yet even as he said it, he felt the answer. Grace was never about deserving. It was about love that never let go. Night fell outside the window, but he did not feel the same darkness inside. Instead, hope flickered like a small flame beginning to grow. He could not explain it, but he no longer feared the future. Pain remained in his body, yet his soul felt healed in a way medicine could never reach. He began to think differently. Maybe his life still had meaning. Maybe the years he thought wasted could be redeemed. The thought terrified him, but also thrilled him. Could it be that God was not finished with him yet? That possibility gave him strength he thought was gone forever. As the hours stretched, he lay back on his pillow, staring at the ceiling with wet eyes. He replayed the phrase over and over, carving it into his memory. "I never left you." He realized that this was not just comfort, it was a promise. If God had not abandoned him through rebellion, anger, and despair, then he would not abandon him in recovery either. He thought of the road ahead, therapy, scars, loneliness, but now he knew he would not walk it alone. That knowledge brought more peace than any medicine ever could. His chest rose with a new kind of strength. By morning, something remarkable had changed. Nurses noticed the difference in his demeanor. His face, once marked by bitterness, now showed softness. His voice carried calm when he spoke. He was still weak, but there was a light in his eyes that had not been there in years. One nurse even whispered, "You look different." He smiled faintly, unable to explain. How could he describe an encounter with the eternal? How could words capture love that stayed even when rejected? He simply held on to the truth. He had been found when he thought he was lost. For the first time in decades, he prayed, not out of duty, not out of anger, but out of genuine surrender. His words were simple, broken, but real. "Thank you for never leaving me." He closed his eyes, and this time sleep came without nightmares. In the silence, he no longer feared abandonment. He no longer doubted his worth. He knew he was loved beyond measure, and as he drifted off, the phrase echoed once more inside his soul. "I never left you." This time, he believed it, and believing changed everything. He felt his body collapse under the weight of something he could not name. For years, he had stood tall in his pain, holding tightly to pride as if it were his last defense. But now, as the words echoed within him, "I never left you," everything inside broke. His knees hit the cold hospital floor, the sterile tiles pressing hard against bone, yet he barely noticed. Tears rushed down his face, not the controlled ones he used to hide in silence, but sobs that shook his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to be weak. The strength he once believed defined him was gone, replaced by raw vulnerability. His clenched fists opened, his head bowed low, and pride crumbled like fragile glass. All the accusations he had thrown at God, all the anger, all the curses, fell silent. In their place came grief, but also release. It was as if he had been carrying a mountain of bitterness, and now, in one moment of surrender, it rolled off his shoulders. He realized his suffering had not gone unseen. The weight of loneliness, years of rage, and the echo of night screaming into the dark suddenly felt smaller. His sobs filled the room, but instead of shame, he felt cleansing. It was the sound of chains snapping. His tears painted the floor beneath him, a silent altar where pain was offered up. The room itself seemed different, lighter, softer, though nothing had changed except his heart. Every image of betrayal, every scar from his accident, every whisper of "you're hated" replayed before him, but this time they seemed powerless. He saw now that his pride had been his shield, yet that shield had kept him in prison. Kneeling there, shattered, he found something stronger than defense: surrender. He was no longer fighting, no longer demanding answers, no longer pretending he could endure alone. His chest burned as the tears continued, but deep beneath the sorrow, a strange warmth grew. He could not explain it, but he felt as though arms he could not see had wrapped around him. His body still ached, his scars were still real, yet the fear that had haunted him slipped away. The pride that once whispered, "Stand tall, never bow," was gone. In its place, humility whispered, "Kneel, and you'll rise differently." He did not pray with words, not yet. He could only cry. But his tears were more eloquent than anything he had ever spoken. They carried years of pain, anger, and silence, now spilling freely before the one he had denied. For the first time, it was not rebellion that defined him, but surrender. And surrender tasted like freedom. Minutes felt like hours, yet he did not care. Time dissolved. The sterile smell of medicine mixed with the salt of his tears, and the hospital walls became holy ground. The bed beside him was no longer just a place of weakness, but the setting of a battle fought and lost. And in that loss, he had won something greater. His knees hurt, his chest trembled, but he did not move. As the sobbing quieted, his breath came slow and heavy. His body felt emptied, but his soul felt filled. Pride, once his only armor, was gone, and he did not miss it. In its absence, he discovered something he had never known: peace that was not earned, and love that was not deserved. The words, "I never left you," rang again in his spirit, and now they felt like truth carved into stone. He understood, with tears still streaming, that he was not abandoned, not hated, not cursed. His pain had not been punishment, it had been a journey. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night had led him to this kneeling moment. He was no longer angry, he was no longer afraid, he was simply held. And as he remained on the floor, fragile yet strangely strong, he whispered the first words of surrender. "I was wrong, forgive me." His voice cracked, but it carried more weight than all his accusations. It was the moment his pride shattered completely, leaving room for grace to flood in. For the first time in years, he knew he was not alone. He sat in silence, the weight of his own words returning to him with a sharp sting. The old vow, "I'll never believe again," echoed in his mind like a curse he had spoken over his own soul. For years, he had demanded proof on his terms, in the way he imagined God should reveal himself. Yet now, lying weak, broken, and humbled, he realized the answer had come differently. It wasn't thunder, nor visions, nor miracles carved in stone. It was a quiet presence that pierced deeper than logic and softer than argument. He remembered how many nights he had clenched his fists, daring the heavens to show something undeniable. He wanted science, evidence, an equation that could prove the divine. But now, the memory of that challenge felt almost childish. What he truly needed was not information, but transformation. His pride had blinded him, and only through loss and silence had he been able to see. The words, "I never left you," burned inside his chest like a fire, both painful and comforting. Could it be that through all the accidents, the loneliness, the bitter words, and the nights of despair, God had been near all along? He could almost retrace the moments when despair should have destroyed him, but something always pulled him back from the edge. His heart broke, not out of shame alone, but out of gratitude. He understood now that the vow he had made to reject faith had never pushed God away. It had only hardened his own heart. Yet even so, God had waited, patient, tender, unrelenting in mercy. Tears rolled freely, soaking the hospital sheets. For the first time in years, he prayed. Not a demand, not a curse, not a challenge, just a broken whisper. Thank you for not letting me go. The realization came like a flood, impossible to push aside any longer. For years, he had demanded evidence on his own terms, daring God to appear in thunder or fire. Yet here, in the quiet of his hospital room, he felt something stronger than thunder and deeper than fire. It was love, undeserved, relentless, undeniable. He wanted to resist it, but resistance was broken the moment he admitted he could not explain it away. His bitterness melted in the warmth of something greater than logic. The same man who had sworn to never believe again now trembled under the weight of belief returning. His pride had crumbled like dust. His soul, once chained in despair, now ached for release. And though he could not see God with his eyes, he could feel him with his heart. He pressed his hands against his face, trembling, overwhelmed by the conflict within. Memories of rejection, loss, and unanswered prayers surfaced, demanding that he hold on to his anger. But they were silenced by something stronger. The undeniable sense that someone had been carrying him through every valley. He recalled nights of despair when he almost ended it all. Yet somehow he endured. He thought it was mere coincidence, but now he saw a hand unseen had preserved him. Every scar, every tear, every lonely moment was now wrapped in the assurance of divine presence. His logic failed him, but his heart testified louder than his doubts. This was not weakness, it was revelation. The God he had cursed had never abandoned him. And in that moment, belief was no longer an option, but a necessity. On his knees, he whispered words he never thought he would say again. They were broken, stumbling, without eloquence, but they were real. I believe you were here all along. His lips trembled as tears soaked the floor. He felt no condemnation, only a flood of mercy that shattered the walls he had built. He expected judgment, but instead found embrace. He thought God would remind him of his rebellion, but instead he felt reminders of love. Every breath became a prayer, every heartbeat a testimony. He understood that faith was not about seeing signs, but about recognizing presence. And now, in the hospital room where he expected only suffering, he encountered healing far deeper than the body. His soul, once lifeless, was alive again. The nurses who passed by glanced into the room, but they could not see what was happening inside. To them, it was just another patient on his knees. But within him, eternity was unfolding. A war that had raged for years was finally over. Chains that no medicine could break were falling off. He did not hear an audible voice, yet he knew the words were real. I never left you. The pride that once held him captive no longer had power. His questions did not vanish, but they no longer poisoned him. He was not given explanations for every pain, but he was given peace. And for the first time in decades, he felt whole. He knew this was not emotion alone, it was truth reshaping his being. The turning point was not dramatic in the world's eyes, but it was eternal in his. The man who had mocked faith, who had sworn never to believe, was now clinging to the very one he once rejected. He understood that love had pursued him even in his rebellion. He realized that the true miracle was not the absence of pain, but the presence of God in the midst of it. His body remained frail, but his spirit was unshakable. Every breath was now an offering. Every moment of life was now sacred. He no longer felt abandoned. He felt chosen. And though tears still flowed, they were no longer from despair, but from gratitude. God had won his heart without force, only with relentless love. That night, he could not sleep, not because of pain, but because of wonder. He replayed every moment of his journey, now seeing it through different eyes. The betrayals, the sickness, the loneliness, none of it was wasted. Every trial had led him here, to this encounter. He saw that even in silence, God was speaking. Even in absence, he was present. What once looked like abandonment now looked like preparation. His story was not a tragedy, but a testimony. The darkness that once defined him had now been pierced by light. And though he still bore scars, they were no longer symbols of defeat, but of survival. He realized he had been carried, not crushed, loved, not forsaken. Days turned into weeks, and his heart continued to change. He began speaking with nurses and patients, sharing what had happened. Some rolled their eyes, but others leaned in, drawn by the fire in his words. He was no longer ashamed to mention God. The same man who once cursed heaven now spoke of grace with trembling joy. His faith was not polished or eloquent, but it was raw and real. He told them that miracles did not always come as healings, but sometimes as peace in the storm. He told them that love could find you even when you were running, and he told them that if God could reach a man like him, no one was beyond hope. His testimony became his new strength. When he was finally discharged from the hospital, he walked out not only as a patient, but as a different man. The world outside had not changed, but he had. The same streets looked brighter, the same air felt lighter. He no longer carried the bitterness that once poisoned him. Instead, he carried faith, fragile yet unshakable. He visited the places where he once mocked believers, now humbled by his own transformation. He sought forgiveness from those he had hurt in his rage. Some forgave him, others did not, but he knew grace had already covered him. His life became a journey of restoration, one step at a time, and every step was guided by the one who never left him. In time, he returned to the people who had once walked away, hoping to mend broken bridges. Some were surprised, others skeptical, but he was not trying to prove himself. He was living proof. His joy was not in convincing others, but in simply shining with what he had received. He did not claim to have all the answers, but he carried peace that spoke louder than arguments. He saw that faith was not about winning debates, but about living transformation. Slowly, people began to notice. They saw the difference in his eyes, the gentleness in his tone. They saw the man who once carried rage, now carrying grace. His story became his ministry. His scars became his sermon. Years later, when he looked back, he marveled at the irony of his journey. The words, "I'll never believe again," had once defined him. Now they served as the reminder of how far grace had carried him. He realized that God had not forced belief into his heart, but had patiently waited for the moment he was ready. That moment came not with thunder, but with peace, not with fire, but with love. He understood that faith was not about demanding signs, but about receiving what was freely given. His life became a living contradiction to his old vows, and with every breath, he thanked the one who never left. His story ended not in despair, but in redemption, and for him, that was the greatest miracle of all. The hospital lights eventually dimmed, but his heart remained awake, burning with a truth he could no longer deny. For years, he had demanded evidence, mocked faith, and placed science on a throne that never gave him peace. Yet in the silence of one night, when everything seemed lost, God whispered into his soul. It was not thunder, not proof in formulas or laboratories, but love, raw, undeniable love. Tears stained his face as he realized the presence he felt was no hallucination. It was not an invention of his desperate mind. It was real. It was him. The one he cursed had never abandoned him. The one he rejected had stayed. From that night on, he walked differently. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because his heart had changed. The bitterness that once rotted his thoughts began to fade like mist before the morning sun. Hope, fragile yet powerful, took root inside him. He learned that faith was not about having all the answers, but about trusting the one who holds them. The scars remained, but they no longer defined him. His past no longer chained him. He had been pursued by love even when he fought against it, and now he chose to surrender. Days turned into weeks, and the news spread among friends who had left him long ago. Some were skeptical, laughing at the idea of his conversion. Others were curious, seeing a glow in his eyes that had not been there for years. He no longer felt the need to prove anything through debate or clever arguments. His life itself became the evidence. Every word softened, every gesture carried compassion. Where once there was rage, now there was peace. People could not explain it, but he knew it was God working in him. The man who once cursed heaven now found himself praying at dawn. Not with perfect words, but with a broken heart finally mended. He spoke with honesty, confessing pain and gratitude, doubts and trust, and every prayer seemed to weave him deeper into the arms of the one who said, "I never left you." That phrase became his anchor. Whenever fear returned, he repeated it. Whenever loneliness tried to creep in, he remembered it. No scientific theory could erase it. No argument could uproot it. It was truth written on his soul. One afternoon, he walked past the places that once tempted him into despair. Bars, alleys, empty apartments filled with shadows of his past. They no longer had power. He saw them as graves of the man he used to be. He was alive now. Not because he found a new philosophy, but because he encountered a living God. The weight that once crushed him had lifted, and in its place, a calling emerged, to share what he had found. Not as a preacher, not as a philosopher, but as a witness of mercy. The testimony of his life began to ripple. A neighbor battling addiction heard his story and asked questions. A nurse at the hospital where he had cried that night confessed her own doubts, and he encouraged her. Even strangers felt something when he spoke, not eloquence, but sincerity. His story was simple. I rejected God, but he never rejected me. And that truth carried power beyond human reason. It was not just his story, it was the story of grace that could reach anyone. In time, he opened a worn Bible that someone had given him years ago, one he had mocked and left gathering dust. Now, the words came alive. Passages he once dismissed pierced his heart. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Those verses were no longer poetry or myth, they were reality. He had walked through shadows, and indeed, he had been with him. Each page became food for his soul, rebuilding the foundation of his life. As years passed, he realized that faith was not about escaping suffering. Pain still came, trials still tested him, but the difference was presence. He no longer faced them alone. The peace that once descended in the hospital stayed with him through every storm. Even in loss, even in sickness, he could look upward and say, "I am not forsaken." That confidence transformed everything. Life no longer frightened him. Death no longer terrified him. He belonged. He was loved. And so, his story became a living monument to the God who pursues the broken. To the skeptic, he said, "I was once like you." To the angry, he whispered, "I cursed him too." To the hopeless, he proclaimed, "There is hope." His life was proof that grace is not earned, but given freely. Proof that even in the darkest night, light can break through. Proof that God's love does not end when ours does. His journey, once marked by despair, was now defined by redemption. At last, he looked back not with shame but with gratitude. The questions that once enslaved him no longer mattered. The anger that once consumed him no longer held sway. He was free, not because he found every answer, but because he found the answer. And with a trembling but joyful heart, he spoke the words that had become the anthem of his life. I was lost, but he found me. I was broken, but he healed me. I was blind, but now I see.